Hello, good afternoon. Welcome. We'll give um, maybe a couple more minutes for people to get logged in before we get started here. Okay. Thank you all for joining us today in what is our fourth and final installment of our series that we've been doing. We've been doing one a month since August, and I can think of no one better than Catherine Brady to round us out here. So today we're going to talk about immigration issues as they relate to mosques. So did you know that mosques can sponsor employment visas for non-citizen religious workers and lawful permanent residents, aka green cards? Join the head of MLFA's immigration department, Kate Brady, as she discusses the whys and hows to legally and successfully accomplish sponsoring and hiring the best and brightest imams and leaders for your mosque. So with that, I'm going to give Kate's bio for you. Catherine Brady has practiced as an immigration and national law attorney since 2006 with extensive experience in family-based and employment-based petitions before U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services and the Department of State. She has represented a wide variety of clients before USCIS for applications for adjustment of status, applications to naturalize to become a U.S. citizen, and petitions for non-immigrant workers. Her experience includes USCIS motions to reopen and or reconsider denials and appeals to the Administrative Appeals Office when benefits have been administratively denied. Additionally, she has assisted clients with Department of State applications for immigrant visas, including those requiring waivers of inadmissibility and improving derivative citizenship of foreign-born children of U.S. citizen parents. Before joining MLFA, which used to be called CLCMA, Kate represented clients in removal proceedings before the Executive Office of Immigration Review and the Board of Immigration Appeals. So that is way above my pay grade and knowledge, so I'm excited to hear what Kate has to say. She obtained her law degree from Texas Wesleyan University School of Law, which is now Texas A&M in Fort Worth, in May of 2006, and she earned her Bachelor of Science in Sociology with a concentration in Social Psychology from BYU. We're super happy to have her here, and with that, I will turn it over to Kate.
Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are watching this. I am excited as well to share with you some of the knowledge that I have about the religious worker, both temporary workers and permanent workers, or what we generally refer to as permanent residents. So we'll kind of jump right into it. So one of the things about immigration is we have a lot of very specific terms. I wanted to give you guys a little bit of that before we jump into everything, just so you can kind of follow along with our kind of weird, almost sub-language of the law that we talk about. So if you think about, there's two different ways that people come to the United States. Sometimes it's temporary, and we call those non-immigrants. Sometimes it's permanent, and we call those immigrants. So when you immigrate to the U.S., we refer to those people as becoming lawful permanent residents. A lot of people refer to them as green cards. The cards used to be green. They are no longer green. On the other hand, those people who are outside of the U.S., when you get a visa to come to the U.S., you're at a U.S. consulate or embassy. And when you do that for the purpose of permanent resident, we in the immigration field refer to that as your consular processing versus adjustment of status, which is an absolutely bizarre term. Nobody uses this term outside of this context, but that is what we call it. If you're already in the United States in lawful status, you are changing from, let's say, a temporary worker who is an R1 and becoming a permanent resident through the process. the applications that we'll talk about. The visa that I mentioned before, most of you have probably seen these at some point. It is what they call a foil page in your passport, actually physically in your passport. And I always like to talk about this one as a ticket to come to the door, because nobody is ever guaranteed entry. But that is how a Department of State employee had once explained it to a group of immigration attorneys. And then another very specific thing is everything in immigration has a form number. So when you come to the United States, they actually record that you've entered if you are a non-immigrant, and you get what is called the Form I-94 in your arrival departure record. It is now electronic and no longer physical, and you typically do not get that if you are a lawful permanent resident, and you never get it if you're a U.S. citizen. They only track the non-immigrants. So those are kind of some terms to think about as we talk about this very regulatory area of the law. All right, next slide. So there's two halves of employment in the United States for most people. There's an employer, which we refer to as a petitioner, and the worker, which we refer to as a beneficiary. Those are different terms than if you are petitioning for a relative, because the beneficiary of those is usually the foreign spouse. So it's the same type of situation, just depending on who you are. So here we're talking about the mosques as the employer, the petitioner. So when USCIS ever refers to you, they will not refer to you typically by your name of the mosque. They will refer to you as the petitioner and your worker as the beneficiary. So these are from the regulations that talk about who can be a petitioner. So when you have a religious denomination or a religious organization, that is the petitioner who actually has the employees and the need. So a denomination is that group of people that is part of the religious order. So obviously outside of mosques, there are many, many religious organizations and denominations. We'll kind of get to that in a later slide. In this category, as a religious worker, employer, petitioner, you must be a nonprofit religious organization. And the issue there is that it's an IRS designation. And so I'm not going to tell you how to do that. Sana is very good at nonprofit. So I will defer that to her. But the other sub-way that you can be an R1 employer is for someone who is affiliated with the religious denomination. I was just off the top of my head thinking maybe something like if the Lutheran Church has counseling services. So they may, but they are affiliated with like maybe a counseling service. So they are not the actual religious organization or denomination, but they're affiliated maybe with the Lutheran Church, something like that. The beneficiary, as I said, is going to come to the U.S. It's temporary under the R1. There's set hours, as you see here. They have to have experience. They have to be a member of your denomination and have to have employment experience as well after the age of 14. And they have to have an intention to come for that purpose. Intent is a very big specific piece of immigration, because if you say you're coming as a religious worker and you end up coming here, never working as a religious worker, maybe deciding you're going to open your own business instead, that's going to be something that's mismatched later on when you start asking for other benefits. So your intention matters. Next slide. This is kind of the real nitty gritty of what happens. And one of the things I will say is many organizations have done these before, or maybe have an attorney who they've worked with before. I would strongly recommend, if you haven't done any of these before, that you hire a private attorney. This is not a service that we at MLFA do. We don't do what I consider that petition-based or that transactional work. We do more complicated things. So sometimes we might have somebody who has run into a problem related to our mission of having discrimination that's related to national security, but we do not typically file these initially. I would strongly recommend that you get an attorney, because they're going to have a checklist for you, and it's going to tell you all this proof that you need to do. Obviously, you're going to need to prove your organization, that they're religious, the purpose of your organization, their tax exempt status, what you're going to pay this person, and if there is non-salary compensation, as you see here, the examples, or if that person is going to be self-supported. you're going to have to show how there's membership and the evidence regarding the position. Then there's also some other possibilities. If you think any of these are too burdensome, there's this Religious Freedom of Restoration Act, which I know Christy, who's our civil department, has used this, the RFRA, at other times. If you think any of these are overly burdensome, you have to prove that to the government. But otherwise, these are what you want to prove, and you have to prove that the religious worker qualifies. Next slide. So one of the things that is almost guaranteed if you're a first-time filer of an R1 for your organization or your mosque is that USCIS will send out one of their inspectors, either from potentially like the Fraud Detection and National Security Unit or the Homeland Security investigators, because what they're trying to do is make sure what you said in your application is factually true when they come on site. They want to see that the person is working at the place that you said, that they are doing what you said they were going to do. And mostly those are random, but they also can suspect some fraud, and they may come in and do that more often in situations where they think that there is something that is already a mismatch. So again, they're verifying all of those things that you said in your application, which we call a petition. As you saw on the original slide, or a slide back, it's another form, the form I-129, which is used for many, many, many non-immigrant classifications. It's a very long form, but you typically fill out the first part and then you jump to the one that goes with you. So you may, while you're getting to R, which is a very, far down in the alphabet, because we have an alphabet soup of other visas, you may pass a lot of other classifications. The most important thing is that your employee is working at the physical site that you told them to. Because if they go to that physical site and he or she is not there, then that is going to be a reason for them to start investigating even deeper. And as this says, that can be either before or after they approve the petition. Next slide. So the other thing is that R1s, like many other categories, are time limited. You can only have it for 60 months, 5 years. So when USCIS does this, they typically cut the times in half and give you half at the beginning, and then you can extend to the other half if you are with the same organization, or if you change organizations, you can capture up to that 60 months with all of the organizations. So you don't get to start over in that 60-month period as an employee if you continue to work for other employers. And every time you're in the US, that's going to count towards the 60 months. But if you take, let's say you go for Umrah or Hajj, and you're outside of the US for an extended period of time, basically that time gets subtracted from your 60 months. We have a process that we show that you were outside the US if we're ever asking for what looks to be more than 5 calendar years, to show that we are recapturing the time you were gone. And so in calendar years, you may extend beyond, but that's because you've had those times outside of your physical presence in the US, where you get to kind of tack those onto the end. So the biggest thing here is that 60 months is a hard stop if you have not moved on to another status, like we're going to talk about the special immigrant visa, green card. And if you want to come back have that worker come back for another 5-year period, they have to be outside the United States, completely out, not just in another status, for a 1-year period. And then they can restart a new 60-month period. Otherwise, 60 months, they're out. Next slide. So one of the other requirements that USCIS has, and this has been something that has been in the regulations for a long time, but I don't think was enforced maybe before the last probably 10 years very much, is employers are supposed to notify USCIS when their workers are no longer working. And that's not just for R1s. And the reason for that is that really USCIS has a right to know whether people are in or out of the position that they have been approved for. So the other thing is you also have to notify them of changes. So either terminations or changes. And as you can see here, we've got several things that are changes that can happen. And it doesn't mean that you will have any problems as far as getting something approved, but often when it is a physical work location or number of hours or the duties performed, if it's not within the range of what you've already asked USCIS for, they're likely going to ask you to notify them formally in a brand new application, because it does have to be in writing. They don't want a phone call, and it's a very formal process that they have. Next slide. So you've successfully navigated the process, and we're going to talk about how that works out for your worker to come work for you. I'm going to first talk about somebody who's inside the United States, and then we're going to talk about somebody who's outside the United States. So think about this person who potentially is maybe a student. Let's say they're advancing their Arabic studies or their Middle Eastern history studies. So they're potentially as a F1 international student. Maybe they're coming in under a trainee program under another classification of student like a J1. They are allowed to make an application. You are allowed to make an application really on their behalf to USCIS to say, this person is now going to transition from that student status to a worker status. So you still have to prove everything. Just because they're already in the United States, they're already in a valid status, doesn't mean that that goes away. But you are going to make that application on that Form I-129 with all of the proofs about you and the employer. And from that, they are going to be able, once it is approved, to be eligible to work for you. There are some classifications that when you change from one employer to another, they give you the ability to immediately start working. R1 is not one of those. So if you're aware of any of those, especially I think about like the H1B, which is the specialty occupation worker, very big in the tech world, that one allows you to file the application for a change of employer and immediately go to the next employer. That is not true here. You always have to have an approved petition. All right, next one. So now let's talk about something that potentially is happening for somebody who you are aware of who lives outside of the United States. And again, remember from that first kind of explanatory slide, I talked about consular processing. So because they're not in the United States, the only way for them to come to the United States is to get a valid visa, because that is their travel document that allows them to ask to come in. And then they are going to, then you're still going to do that petition process. You're still going to get an approved petition. Then they have to go to whatever the embassy or consulate is that has jurisdiction over where they live abroad. And they're going to then have an appointment. They're going to make an online application for just the visa, pay the visa fees, and then they're going to have an in-person appointment with a consular officer who's going to decide whether or not they're going to get that visa. And sometimes that's very stressful because certain consulates are very strict, and you just need to kind of prepare yourself and your employee that there are times when there are delays. Either the Department of State does not think they have all of the information, they ask for more, or they want to do additional security checks after. If you've been in the green card process abroad at all, or even trying to get visas, you may have heard the term administrative processing. It's kind of that black hole of security checks or name checks that happens at the end of a visa application. Nobody likes to hear that. It is possible to get through it, but it is a delay that you need to think about. Once they have a visa, then they can come to the United States port of entry. That does not mean that they are absolutely going to get in. They still have to pass through our lovely U.S. Custom and Border Protection, and they are going to be screened to make sure one last time that that officer believes that they're coming for the purpose that they got that visa and have no other inadmissibility issues. And that's another term that we use in immigration, just kind of as an easy way to think about it, is no other reasons why the U.S. would not want them into the United States. And those are things like prior deportations or prior violations of status, maybe evidence of a communicable disease, or as we know during COVID, they didn't let a lot of people in because of a public health emergency, those kind of things. And one of the golden things about being Canadian, if you have a Canadian worker, is they don't even have to go through that visa process. They still have to come in through the port of entry, so they still may be scrutinized there, but they are exempt from getting that consular interview page in their passport. It's something that we've provided to Canada that we don't provide to anyone else. Maybe you've heard of other things like our electronic visa waiver program. That's for, I don't know, I think it's up to 40 countries now, for the temporary visas for tourists and work, but that's also something that Canada doesn't even have to do. Kind of what we're going to have to do in a lot of the European countries starting next year. Next slide. So as I was preparing to kind of give you guys some information, I thought, what are some things that religious workers might just be wondering if they're even exploring the opportunity to come here? And that if you are talking with a religious worker, you might be able to calm some of their concerns. One of them is if they have a spouse or children, can those spouse and children come with them? And the answer is yes. Now, they do also have to be eligible to be in the United States, to have the visa, and to pass that screening at Customs and Border Protection. So if any of those things are a problem for that spouse or dependent, that does not get cleared up just because there is a religious worker that they're able to hook their visa to. Children is kind of a different definition in the immigration world. We have an actual statutory and regulatory definition. A child is anyone who has not yet reached 21. So you're 20 years and 11 months and 29 days. You have not had your birthday for your 21st birthday yet, and you are unmarried. That is a child within the immigration definition. So all of those dependents are allowed to come. Now here's the problem though. Once they turn 21, even if they're in the United States as your R2 dependent, they're not going to be able to continue on with that status. 21 cuts them off. They're going to have to figure out another status, such as going to university and becoming an F1 international student. Maybe they have already a degree and they're going to get a different worker category. Maybe they qualify for an R1 so they can find a sponsoring organization. All of those things are possibilities. You just need to think about your religious workers when they come. If that's something that they're thinking is they're going to bring their children who are between 18 and 20, that they need to think about, like, what's the long-term goal there. Also, none of those R2 dependents, the spouse or the children, have work authorization through their R2. Again, there are other ways to get work authorization, but if your status is based on your spouse, that is not going to happen. But again, there are lots of other immigration possibilities. People who want to work might go for some of those other possibilities. Like there's a category for intra-country transferees. If you've worked for a country abroad, they have a U.S. company. There's the L for that. Maybe they're eligible for permanent residence because like a child who maybe marries a United States citizen and that citizen spouse can then petition them for permanent residence. Maybe you're from a country that has temporary protected status and they can apply for that when it's eligible. Or if there's a potential for persecution, if they return to their home country, asylum, all of those things. So lots of things to talk about when you have that employee. Encourage them to talk to a licensed attorney for U.S. immigration law, because some of those things may seem like there's doors closed, but you never know. They have the same opportunities for benefits as everyone else. Sometimes, like I said, those either the dependent students or maybe the person that they want to hire as an R1 is already a student, might have work authorization through that. They're very specific in work authorization that goes with the student status. And what they're looking at is how does that match up to the degree they're studying? In most cases, this is what they're looking at. So let's say you do have somebody who is studying Middle Eastern history or, advanced Arabic studies, something like that. That is something that could match well with some of the things that happen for religious workers in a mosque. On the other hand, if they are studying chemical engineering, that's probably not a worker that you're going to be able to match up for something that is hooked directly to their degree. But there are there's some wiggle room a little bit in certain countries that are at war right now, or that people cannot return to for those humanitarian reasons. The government has currently given some opportunities to have work authorization to students on those economic hardships. Of course, we all know that we had an election last year. Policies are going to change, but for right now and for the next almost 3.5 months, those are available. And you just need to kind of think about how long can you count on those with what we know from the prior Trump administration for the, I guess, almost generous benefits that some of the things that this current administration has done for students in these severely economic hardship situations. All right, next slide. So once you have a non-immigrant worker who thinks they're coming here temporarily, almost always the very next thing is, how can I stay here permanently? What I would say about this is we have very different reasons for having temporary workers and permanent workers. So when you look at a permanent worker, the government no longer is worried about your intent of only being here 60 months. Now they're looking at, we know that you want to be here long term. And when we talk about permanent residence, this is really that interim step between temporary worker and the eligibility to apply for naturalization to become a U.S. citizen. So this is one where you're able to, work, live, travel back and forth on a much easier basis because you no longer have to have a visa. But you do need to intend to live in the United States for more time than out. So when I've had people who in any category for permanent residence who said, yes, but I also have this need to be out of the United States for 6 months out of the year, it really kind of doesn't lend itself well. I say with non-immigrants, you want to be showing that you have a temporary intent to leave at the end. With lawful permanent residents, they really want to know that you want to be here. Again, there's a very specific form that you file, but it's one of those combined forms. So when we look at it, if you look at the title of it, it says this is for Amerasians, widows, and special immigrants, which includes not only religious workers, but also some special immigrant juveniles, which are usually minors who come to the United States who don't have a parent here, who are also trying to become lawful permanent residents. We have very similar requirements for the lawful permanent resident as far as what the employee should be coming to do and how much they're going to work, paying them, the type of organization that you have to be is exactly the same for a temporary worker as it is for a permanent worker. And they can actually go either direction as well. They can be outside the United States, consular processing, because they've never been in the U.S. working for you, or they can be in the U.S. having worked for you, honestly, or another employer, or in another status, as long as you go through this process of proving that they are going to be eligible under the regulations to work for you in this religious worker category. There's a little bit of kind of a split between like what they call ministers, and I know that's not the term that you use in the mosques, but it's the term in the law, ministers and workers, meaning the difference between people who actually might give religious instruction or lead prayers, those kind of things, versus somebody who might work in, let's say, the school part of a religious organization, but also bound by the tenets that they're teaching that are with the religious organization. So that's kind of the way things are the same and the way things are different. And there are a limited number of these visas. We still call them visas each year, but the Department of State has an allocation that Congress has given them. in this category. And what that also means is sometimes there's a wait, because once you file this Form 360, this is like your ticket to become a permanent resident. There's a second application that you file once you're at the front of that line in the limited number that they have. And that is the Form I-485 if you're in the US, or the Department of State Form 260 if you're outside of the United States. Again, that's the application to get another physical page in your passport, because you do come into the US on a visa the same way in this, but you are coming in as an immigrant. So a lot of little technical details. You're not probably, if you've never done these or never seen these, this is not going to be something where if you take notes today, you're going to just go run off and be able to do it yourself. Again, I really recommend that you look into somebody who specializes in these visas and religious workers, if that's what you're looking at moving towards, or if you just need help doing these in the future. Okay, next slide. So again, just kind of reiterating, this is very similar to what the temporary worker is, but these are the qualifications of that worker. And if you have somebody who is almost there and you're thinking USCIS won't notice because maybe they've worked for 1 year and 10 months when you file that petition, I can guarantee you that USCIS will notice. So take these very, very seriously. And what you provide to them as compensation, as hours, and what their job duties are, those really, really, really need to match. Because especially if they do one of those site visits, right? So when we're looking at what we provide to USCIS on temporary basis or on a permanent basis for the special immigrant visa, USCIS will always dive deep and make sure that everything lines up with the requirements and what you said and the facts that happen for that specific employee and for your religious organization too. So changes to any of those can be a big issue, because the government is not going to allow a person to kind of gloss over any of those. It's going to be required that they meet all of them. All right, next slide. Same as for the religious worker, you're going to prove everything about your organizations, about the salary. If they've been employed by you before, quite often you're also providing that you've paid them in the past, not just what you will pay them in the future. Also, all of those things about the worker, that you're showing that they are part of your denomination, that they've gotten those 2 years of work. There's no such thing with USCIS as just writing down or checking a box that says, yes, for certain, this person meets the qualification. There's always supporting documentation. So I think as an immigration attorney, one of the very, very, very first things I ever do with people is explain to them what the qualifications are and then ask for their supporting documentation and then help them to understand where they have holes and gaps. Because the ability for your case to go slow when you have not looked at the entire process and where your gaps are is very frustrating, not just for you as an organization, but also for the worker and their family. Think about somebody who can't maybe change from being an international student to being a religious worker or a special immigrant visa or special immigrant through this process. And that is very frustrating because you can't get the services that you desperately need. They can't kind of move forward in their life. So you can ask any immigration attorney, and I'm sure most of them will say, show me your documents. All right, next slide. All right, I'm going to have Sana come in and give me a little bit of a quiz here. See how well I do. So,
okay. Am I asking you these?
Yes, please.
Or are you asking me? Am I getting quizzed? What work would not qualify as a religious vocation?
So, a lot of times when I think of this, I end up thinking about people who really, really think that they're qualified because they are very religious and they might do something periodically. So when I think of mosques, I think sometimes people who maybe do prayers on a regular basis on the Juma prayers, but definitely not coming up to 35 hours a week. And definitely you don't have to have all those other qualifications, right? You don't have to necessarily have worked for the 2 years in the vocation. So Sana, what other things can you think of maybe in the mosques that would be more of a temporary and not rise up to that 35 hours a week and need the religious education or experience?
Well, at our local mosque here, we have several gentlemen who have full-time jobs have a totally different profession, but are just very, very knowledgeable. And like you said, they might give the Friday khutbah, like they might give, a 20, 25-minute talk and then also lead the prayer, but they have totally other full-time jobs. So I think that's kind of maybe the type of person you're looking for. Or there's several women who lead halakha groups, or I don't know what the word is in English for that, but just like almost like a Bible study, right? Like
I was going to say like a
Quranic studies, religious group. So sometimes they do that virtually or in the mosque on the evening or on a weekend or something. So I feel like those people, very valuable people, very valuable people within the community and within the mosque. But obviously, it doesn't seem like they would qualify as far as
serving on the mosque board or a committee. You can be really great at organizing group activities and meals for the congregation, but that's not likely to qualify for either the R1 or the special immigrant.
Okay. So next up, what is the difference between a religious organization and a denomination? Which I need the answer to this question as well, because it affects our C3.
I don't have like the dictionary definition, but when I think about this, many religions have like segments of the world or the United States that have different affiliations with a larger religion. So I know we had something in the last year where
so we have
the Italian church, I think, was breaking apart. Is that what it was? Am I thinking right? Anyway, but that's their denomination of a religion. So think about that. Like the Catholic Church, the Episcopalians, the Lutherans, the Methodists, those are denominations, right? So multiple organizations underneath those, usually within regions, and they all kind of, go up to each other. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So for that one, we are a denomination, but we are all central. Everybody comes out of Utah. Everybody comes out of Salt Lake City. So you don't have variation. We are globally the same. Go ahead.
So then I guess in the context of R1 and all of that, I guess why does that distinction matter?
It's just the different proof, right? So if you're a denomination, so I've seen it like if you are the congregation in, let's see, Mobile, Alabama, and you're part of the Southern Baptist, Southeast little region, you are going to prove that you are connected to that denomination through your affiliation versus a religious organization that's more freestanding, which is how I think of mosques, and maybe some other organizations that are less of the Western religions, maybe like Buddhists or Hindu or things like that. So there's not a denomination that tells them like, here's our doctrine specifically.
Got it. Almost like an umbrella.
Yeah.
Okay.
So each mosque is its own organization.
Sure.
We don't consider it a denomination of Islam because Islam is not like kind of organized in that same block way that Western religions seem to have sliced themselves out.
Sure. Okay, so if we're ready for the next one,
Sure.
What are other types of work authorization that allow a non-citizen to work at a religious organization?
So one of the things that I always think about is the employment authorization document, which is a card, and you can get those in many different ways. You can get those because maybe you are a spouse of a U.S. citizen and they've applied for you to become they've been the petitioner for you to adjust status and become a permanent resident. Potentially you are an asylee, that you've already been granted asylum. And we have a really weird term for this. I don't know why they come up with these terms, but it's called your work authorized incident to status, which means every asylee who's been granted, not those who are still asking for it, can work regardless of whether they have a little document. And that means that you're just able to do that. So I think that's the most common, and refugees as well. Refugees are also in the same way work authorized incident to status. And if you want to think about the difference there, it's almost the difference between adjusting status and consular processing. Asylees have to be here to tell people they're persecuted and asked to stay. Refugees process through the United Nations refugee process outside the United States. But essentially, it's a humanitarian thing. And of course, the very open, easy one that you don't even have to think about the R1s and the special immigrants, absolutely U.S. citizens, right? You don't have to. They don't have to get special permission. They are just always work authorized. So, all right. I think
as a non-immigrant in the world of non-immigration, the one that I've heard of that you mentioned is H-1B. H-1B. Yes. That's the one. And so you alluded to that one before,
right?
And so that would not be one that
probably,
unless it's like a really established.
Well, I can give you my
high-tech mosque.
I can give you my H-1B speech that I used to give like on a daily basis. And H-1B is a specialty occupation, and you have to have at least a bachelor's degree for entry into the profession, and it has to be one that the profession requires a bachelor's degree. So there's a lot of levels of tech that maybe do and don't require a bachelor's degree. We saw tons of pushback on that in the prior Trump administration. But think about what things that go on at your mosque where you're like, I prefer somebody who has the education, and then what things that you're like, it's okay if they do or don't. But if across the board as a profession, people are hiring people without a degree, you're probably not going to get it. And the really terrible thing about H-1Bs is they're limited every year, and they have so many applicants that they always go into a lottery system. So even if you want one, you may be waiting an entire year before that person even gets to apply for an H-1B. Not my favorite, but I've done it a lot because I've done employment-based immigration. A lot of tears that people cry when they don't get selected in the lottery. So.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have some questions that I received separately, not in the comments here, but for those of you joining, please log into your YouTube account and join the chat if you have any comments or questions. We have some time as well. So I'm just going to get to the separate questions that I have here. So once approved, can you work in the same capacity for multiple religious organizations / locations? So for example, could you work at a Dallas office and a Fort Worth office within the same company, within the same mosque, if we're talking about like if a mosque has branches, which some I think do, would that be possible?
Off the top of my head, not having like research regulations on this, is I would say yes, as long as that is what you have described in your petition. So if you have described, they work 20 hours over here and 20 hours over there, and these are the absolute places that we have already described, whether they do exactly the same thing at both places, you can have a little variation on that, and that's fine. But I would say yes.
Okay.
As long as it's for the same organization, right?
Sure. Yeah. How easy or hard is it to transfer the R1 dependent status into another type of status? And how often have you seen dependents having to go back to the home country after they turn 18? You mentioned earlier a little bit about 20, like if they can 21. Transfer it to, is it 21? Transfer it to a student or something like that, student visa or something like that. But like how hard or easy is it to transfer that into another type, to transfer the R1 dependent into another type? I
don't know that I have a ton of experience on R1s, but just generally dependents. It's not hard as long as they qualify for the next stage. So if you're asking to be in the international student status, as long as you get accepted to the college and they file the right paperwork, that's not very hard. Really the last resort for most people is to have them leave. So a lot of people are looking for other ways, like I said, the humanitarian ways, maybe the family-based ways if they are looking towards getting married, hopefully to a U.S. citizen, because that's the best way to transition to an easy stage, although lawful permanent residents also work. Or they could be a dependent on another spouse, right? So like you mentioned, the H-1Bs, there's a dependent for almost every category. So.
Okay. So you actually just mentioned, I think this segues perfectly into our next question, which is, if an R1 visa holder meets a U.S. citizen partner, falls in love, and they decide to get married while they're in the U.S., and still everyone's in status, can they adjust their status while in the U.S., or must they depart the U.S., file their petition abroad, and then apply?
So the great thing about that is that if it's a U.S. citizen, because that's what I'm assuming that we're asking, is that they are able to adjust status, because the rule about adjustment of status when you're in the United States is that you have entered the United States through a lawful port of entry, that you have maintained your status without any break. I think there may be some wiggle room, but I prefer no break, please. It's just so much easier. And that also the relationship qualifies. So you are able to qualify for any immigration status that anybody else has. You're not limited just because you're in that R1 status. If you have love, you can go and you can get married, or you can, have your children have an arranged marriage. All of that is perfectly fine, as long as it is truly for the purpose of marriage, and not, another phrase that I have said probably a million times, solely for the purpose of obtaining that immigration benefit. So.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Your kids are too young for you to start thinking.
There's a silly rom-com movie where they got married to get
if it's the proposal, that's not
true.
That is not true. There's so many things that I would like to write.
Whoever wrote that script. I know. Okay. Okay. So next question: what if my child is under 20? What if my under 21 child was married but is divorced and unmarried now? So does that person qualify? Can they still qualify? Can they kind of re-qualify as your dependent?
Yes, because at the time that they apply, as long as they are unmarried, it isn't never married, it's unmarried.
Okay. 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 I think that's it. Let me check the comments. Let's see. I'll just
I can do a little
leave it open. If anyone has any comments, I'll add our contact information. And you know what, Kate? I actually did not introduce myself properly in the beginning. I was rushing right in. I was excited about bringing up the proposal. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Sana Salim, and I head up the nonprofit department here at MLFA. Kate mentioned a little bit about the work that I do, but we do nonprofit governance, risk compliance, legal screenings. And what that means is we take an organization's documents, we review them, we write a report for the organization and basically do a full analysis, areas that the organization can improve upon, areas that the organization is currently doing well. State federal compliance we look at, handbook and policies, we look at governance and good governance and best practices in that regard. And then we look at financial documents as well. So it's a pro bono service. In fact, everything at MLFA is we have a scope of services, but we provide pro bono legal services at MLFA as well. We have 4 legal departments. For those of you who don't know, we have a criminal defense department, immigration, obviously, with Kate. That's Kate's department, and we have a civil rights department under Christina Jump, and then I head up the nonprofit department. So here's our contact information. Feel free. We have one more question here. What are some immediate concerns for those who are not documented, considering the Trump administration? Just considering the Trump administration that's coming, early January 2025.
That is a big and heavy question. This has kind of been something I think that has concerned a lot of people my entire career, because I've just dealt with a lot of people who have either never had status because they came in outside of a legal port of entry, or came in with the 6 months permission of maybe a tourist and stayed. And I guess for me, it is just kind of keeping your focus on what you can control. And that is kind of at least not bringing the government's attention to you in any negative ways. That's really how most of my clients have ended up in situations that they don't like. And it's things, just little things, like even in places like Texas or a lot of the South, getting pulled over for any violation, is harmful sometimes because those police officers take it very seriously and might ask for your immigration status. But I think also not losing hope, because laws change, administrations change. We'll have another election, at least for Congress, in the next 2 years. Definitely, talk to a licensed immigration attorney if you are concerned about your status. You may not even know that there's some potential for you to be protected in some of those humanitarian ways, or something that maybe if you have a U.S. citizen child that turned 21, that can actually petition for you, because that's another way, not just a spouse, but a child over 21 can petition you. And just really kind of keep your awareness of what's going on. And also, the biggest thing for me that hurts people when they try and do things in the legal profession, that maybe they go to somebody thinking it's somebody who doesn't have a high fee, or my relative or friend can help me. Quite often they create problems that they didn't even realize were there. So just, I guess, trust in good legal professionals, do your due diligence, research them. In some areas of the country, it's not as expensive as you would think. We're actually able to help people all over because it's a federal law. Just do your best to kind of, almost like that buyer beware, kind of like we say, is if it sounds too good to be true, it might be.
Mm-hmm.
So don't dig your hole any deeper. If you're already here without status, you kind of have control over that portion of it. And never, ever, ever lie to the government thinking that it will get you farther, because if they figure out the lie, you're in a much worse situation.
Yep. Always tell the truth.
Yeah.
And we at MLFA, hopefully, keep checking back at our website. All the departments, have some form of resources or blog posts or articles. And I'm sure I know my department has already received some inquiries on kind of where do we go from here, as far as interested topics. So that may be another webinar that we can come up with, or maybe we'll put it into a blog post or something. So definitely keep the website handy for those of y'all who are interested in kind of learning more, and we'll unpack it as we get into January. As far as this video and any of our previous live streams that we've done, these webinars on topics related to mosques in particular, you can go to our YouTube channel, the Muslim Legal Fund of America YouTube channel, like and subscribe, as my kids say. So look back for the videos, and feel free to watch them as they apply to you and your organizations. We really hope this series has been beneficial for all of our mosques in general. A lot of it can be applied, obviously, across the board to general 501c3s as well. We did have some specific mosque issues, obviously, weaved throughout all of our webinars. The website is here in the comment section. Our YouTube, Muslim Legal Fund of America handle. I don't know what they're called.
I don't know. I was going to do maybe a 1 minute wrap up, kind of highlights as well. So just in the topic that we're talking about today, I think what I want you to kind of focus on and take away today is that this is one solution, the R1, and there's also, if you want a lawful permanent resident, the special immigrant. It's not maybe as hard as you think, but it's also not as easy as you think. So kind of get the help that you need, follow the advice of good attorneys, and just really have hope for at least the fact that there are some possibilities for helping you get the help for your mosque that you really need to kind of nourish all of the members of your mosque. As for what we do here, a lot of times we get inquiries that are outside of what we do, which is really for the immigration section, we look for cases that have an impact to combat discrimination for national origin and religion and race in the immigration context, usually because the U.S. government agencies are being unfair and discriminatory. But at least for us, we always want you to leave with at least a direction and some resources. So even if you think that we can't help you, please, as Sana said, we have resources on our web. If it's even a question that you bring to us and we can't help you, hopefully we will be able to point you to either how to find a private attorney or how to find another organization so that you don't feel like you have nowhere to go and no hope. So.
Yeah, we're happy to answer kind of general legal questions as well. I'm sure I can speak for all of our department heads in that regard. So I have done so in the past, and I'm happy to answer legal questions, obviously within my knowledge and expertise. But yeah, feel free to contact us. Thank you so much, Kate, for your time and for putting together this super informative presentation. Really important for mosque and mosque leaders to know, especially when they're getting ready to hire or do any of that for any of their leaders. So with that, thank you so much and have a good afternoon, everyone. Happy Veterans Day. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.